Get to the table.
Here's Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger potion. Wow, so simple. Roll out.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 128 for August 2nd, 2015. And I've accepted this mission, JD Duran.
And I'm Cassidy. Brendan Cassidy. Oh, wait, that's the wrong movie. Oh, we're not in November yet.
Oh, man. But it is pretty appropriate. We'll get to that here in a second.
We will. I have something else to talk about, too, about that, but we'll wait.
Yeah, we'll wait. Thanks for joining us this week, everybody. We do have a really stellar show. But before we get into any of that, first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to all of our fans, as July was our biggest month we've ever had in terms of downloads and engagement with the show, and we were just overwhelmed, absolutely overwhelmed. We hit a fun little milestone, and
we did.
You know, it's all up to you guys, and we really appreciate it, and we thank you so much for listening every single week.
Absolutely.
It just blows us away, so thank you to everyone who's downloaded and listened and supported the show over the last 2 years. It really means a lot to us.
Sure, and I was absolutely stunned by that milestone specifically. That was wonderful. I cannot echo your thanks enough. I just want to repeat that. Thank you guys so much. It really it feels great. It feels. Yeah. I feel like I'm done. I feel like I'm done. I can go home now.
Yes. Yeah, we really do appreciate it, though, and it definitely motivates us to keep moving forward, for sure.
Yeah, I'm not done. That was a joke.
Yeah. Another thing I just want to announce real fast is we have something coming up pretty cool on episode 133. And for those that follow me on Letterboxd, you may have noticed something happening already. Because I've been getting caught up on some films, Brendan, because on September 6th, again, that's episode 133, we are going to be doing our best movies of the decade so far.
Oh my gosh. A little late in the game. I know a lot of other folks have already started publishing these lists, but we're going to finally get caught up with the game. And I think that's a great way to celebrate the end of summer and looking forward to the fall.
Yeah, which is a big reason we were waiting for that, is as we're getting ready for all those big movies coming out in the fall that are usually more awards-heavy movies come out in the fall. We figured it'd be
awards-heavy.
Quote-unquote, yeah. We figured it'd be appropriate for there once we dive down from the summer high, if you will. So
I agree.
And I also just want to note out there, we are defining decades so far as 2010 through 2014.
Absolutely.
I know some people out there, Tim Costa, who apparently have different definitions, but for us, it'll be 2010 to 2014. So,
yeah, and I think that's a good point, because as great as some films that we've had this year so far, I think we need to hold off on those, at least me specifically.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, and we'll save those for our top 10 of 2015. But we still got a lot of competition even this year too. I mean, I don't know.
Sure. I mean, and that is 5 years, so that is halfway through the decade, if you ask me. So
well, if you also include 2010 itself, that's actually 5 years going to 2014. But
yeah,
who's doing the math?
That's what I'm saying. From 2010 to 2014. That's 5 years. That's half a decade. Decade so far. So that's what we're going for there. Anyway, on that note, let's bring on this week's guest, as we have Michael Carter from Backseat Viewer, who's also been a big supporter of us. He does the Follow Friday thing for us every single week. It's absolutely very much appreciated. Mike, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your blog and what it is that you do, and where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, no, I do a Backseat Viewer. You can find me at backseatviewerblogspot.com. I do movie reviews for all genres. Been doing that for about 2 years now. So
very, very cool. And we're definitely grateful to have you on the show. Like I said, we do interact with you on social media all the time. Where can people find you on Twitter, Michael?
You can find me at MichaelCarr34, or you can follow Backseat Viewer's Twitter at just Backseat Viewer.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely go give him a follow. And on this week's show, Brendan, we have some good stuff in the store. So we were kind of alluded to some of it a little bit earlier, but we are going to be reviewing Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, of course, the latest from Tom Cruise. And going off of that, since this series did start in the 90s, of course, we are going to be talking about our top 3 90s action movies.
Oh, I look forward to that.
So we did 80s a few months ago, I guess.
Back in May when Mad Max Fury Road came out.
When Fury Road came out. So this week we're going to the 90s. Certainly look forward to that. And going off of all of that, there's been, of course, a lot of comparisons to James Bond and the Mission Impossible series with Ethan Hunt. So for this week's third segment, we are going to be doing another edition of InSession Film Showdown, James Bond versus Ethan Hunt. And I will say, after seeing Rogue Nation, and we'll talk about this more here in a second, I don't think this could be more appropriate this week.
I think you are exactly right, my friend.
Yeah, so it should be a good show. Last thing I'll say, and then we'll get into it. R.I.P. Mr. Roddy Piper. That was pretty sad that he passed away earlier this week.
Absolutely.
And of course, a lot of people were talking about They Live, and we've talked about They Live on the show a few times. And that fight sequence, the famous one in that movie, is still one of the best of all time.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen the film, but that is my memory of that film is mostly regarded around that scene,
yes,
and
exactly.
for good reason. It's a wonderful sequence.
Absolutely, and I quite enjoy the film. So sad news, but rest in peace, Mr. Roddy Piper.
Absolutely.
And lastly, real fast, go check out our latest Extra Film podcast. We talk about 2 indies that were recently released, The Overnight and the documentary The Wolfpack. And we had a fun discussion with Michael Deniston from War Machine vs. Warhorse.
And it wasn't awkward at all.
And it was, yes, not awkward at all. All that said, guys, we got a full show. Let's get into it.
And here we go.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 128. Brendan, Desperate Times, Desperate Measures.
Wait. Does that mean we get the podcast from the side of a plane? Sweet.
Package is still on that plane.
Shut down the fuel pump. Mechanicals are locked out.
What about the electrical system?
Oh, that might work. No. Hydraulics. Okay, stand by. No, they're encrypted.
Benji, the plane!
Yes, the package is on the plane. We get it.
Can you open the door? I'm by the plane. Benji, can you open the door?
Maybe.
Open the door when I tell you! I'm on the plane! Open the door! How did you get in the plane? Not in the plane! I'm on the plane! Open the door! Open the door! Yeah, okay.
All right, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation is written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie and stars, of course, Tom Cruise, Jeremy Renner, Simon Pegg, Rebecca Ferguson, Ving Rhames, Sean Harris, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. Let's toss it to you first, Michael. What did you think about Mission Impossible Rogue Nation?
It's just like the rest of them, man. It was really good, full of action. I didn't know if I was going to like it when it first started, but Tom Cruise is keeping it interesting.
All right, what about you, Brendan?
Yeah, I'm going to try and make this as short and brief as possible because I have a nostalgia for the Mission Impossible films. The first film, and we may get more into this a little bit when we get to our top 3, but the first Mission Impossible kind of got me into action films when I saw it when I was really young. So I've loved this series ever since, and I thought Ghost Protocol just revamped this entire saga beautifully. So I was very excited going into this, and also coupled with the rave reviews that it's essentially been getting.
Sure.
I was very ecstatic for it. And looking at the reviews after I had seen this film, a lot of people are raving about it, but I don't think they're raving about it for the best reasons. And first off, I'm just going to come right out the bat. I absolutely loved this film. In fact, I'm almost tempted to say it may not be my personal favorite in the saga. I think I may still have to give a biasness towards Ghost Protocol for how much I love Brad Bird and what he brought visually to that film. But I think this is technically probably the best in the franchise because it has the tightest script. I think it has some of the best character moments. The dialogue is so witty, and I think it has some interesting things to say about trust, and it almost uses trust as a thematic device in this film versus just a plot device within a spy espionage film. I'll get more into that later. The main reason why I loved this film, and as great as these action set pieces are, and I'll get to those later because we have to talk about them, the stuff I loved the most were some of the smaller chase sequences on foot. And some of the reason why I like this is because this is the most Hitchcockian film of the franchise, to the point that I was reminded so much of films like The Man Who Knew Too Much from Alfred Hitchcock, which is kind of a direct reference within that opera sequence that happens almost midway through the film. And some of those chase sequences toward the end, without giving too much away, really reminded me of like Carol Reed's The Third Man. This film is very film noir. And I love that about it. The second I got out of this film, my first initial thought was, I don't want to see it again on a big screen. I want to see it in black and white. And I loved that aesthetic to it that I thought was really interesting. It added a very gritty dynamic to it that I was very much engaged by. And I was stunned by that. It's so old-fashioned and so old school, and I think in the best way possible. And as I mentioned, there are other great things such as the action set pieces. I think the story here is very interesting as well. I'll get more into that later, but I loved this film, and I loved it even more than I expected. So yay.
Very cool. Well, like you, Brendan, I also had some high expectations of this. I mean, a lot of the hype was pretty big on this movie, and I also want to preface this by going back to our Mad Max Fury Road discussion, because as much as I liked that movie, and I did like that movie,
yes,
I had a few issues with that movie that kept me from calling it the masterpiece that everyone else was saying about it. And I'm kind of in the same boat here, and I want to kind of throw that out there because I'm going to say some things about this movie, and I don't want people coming back to me going, he hated this movie when I didn't. So I have to say that up front, so that way there's an understanding there. Because is this movie really good? Yes. Did it wow me? No, it did not.
Okay.
But I will say it is still a lot of fun. It does have some great action sequences that we'll get into for sure.
Yeah.
That opening sequence in this movie that is actually a big part of the trailer builds up to it where Ethan is attached to the side of the plane. One, I love how it's a cold open. That is really interesting and kind of goes back to some of the roots of this franchise to begin with. So I like that.
Yeah.
It's still breathtaking. As many times as I've seen it in the trailers or whatever, it's still pretty awesome. I don't care how implausible that it is.
In my opinion, it's not even the best sequence in the film, but we'll get to more of those later. Yeah.
I still had a lot of fun with that. And of course, this film, I think it echoes James Bond more here than any other previous Mission Impossible movies. But my biggest issue with it is it just didn't have the same spirit as something like Ghost Protocol or even some other movies that Tom Cruise has done recently. And again, I want to say I really like this movie, so don't take that as me hating it, because I didn't. Because I like the levity. I love the comedic timing here. I think the story, while it does have some great stuff with it, I wasn't wowed by it like I was saying earlier, but we'll get more into that here in a little bit. I will say, I think my biggest frustration with these movies, not just this one, but really the whole series in general, is for me, there's no attempt at serialization with it. And I've kind of had some of these same problems with the James Bond movies too, until recently. I feel like the Daniel Craig versions have done a lot better at it.
Sure.
But with these movies, there's been no attempt at stitching them together. And what I love about what Brad Bird did in Ghost Protocol is, one, I felt like it was really fun. It had an energetic spirit that was what we've come to love with these, but yet it made it feel like it was bigger than just the film that we were seeing. I mean, we got recalls to previous installments in the franchise. There was mentions of Ethan Hunt's wife. In fact, I think she had a cameo in that last movie.
She did.
But here, there's none of that. There's no stitching this franchise together. There's no layers to any of these characters from what we've seen before. And they pretty much abandon all of what I liked about Ghost Protocol in this movie. Other than if there was one callback to the previous movie, but outside of that, they pretty much get rid of it altogether. And again, it's not just this one; the entire franchise is like this. And so it's hard for me to invest in those characters when it almost feels like a reboot every single time we have one of these movies. And while they are fun, they are a lot of fun, I still feel like I barely know the Ethan Hunt character, and that also trickles down to some of the supporting characters as well. All that being said, Tom Cruise is still great. We'll talk more about him in a second too. It's a really fun summer movie. I guess it just didn't wow me as I was hoping for.
You know, I don't know. I kind of like the detachment that you were talking about, though, because it helps with the whole spy thing. You don't ever really get to know a spy.
And that's an interesting point too. You know, it adds that sense of mystery, I guess. And this movie does have a lot more mystery to this film, and definitely kind of calls back the first Mission Impossible, which was more of a mystery film than it was an action film in many ways. And I kind of like that. But you know, what's interesting, JD, and I can see your points, and I feel that with this franchise overall, but with this film specifically, and this is another reason why I love this film, I'm not quite sure I agree with your criticisms there. And that's, I mean, but I do see what you're getting at, because this is really the first film in the franchise that I felt like this had the continuity within a franchise.
I didn't feel that way at all.
I felt that way fully, and I think mostly because I felt a sense of camaraderie amongst this team. I felt like
I can buy into that.
And it's not so much that if this is the film I think probably is not best seen without seeing the other ones. I think this one doesn't quite stand on its own, maybe as the other ones do. I think a film like Ghost Protocol, you can almost walk in maybe cold and still get a sense of enjoyment out of that film. And I think, you know, the detachment that we were talking about earlier, I think is also more echoed the fact that he kind of usually creates a new team within every single movie, but now we're starting to see repeats with these characters. So if they're introduced well in a previous film, I feel like that still carries over for me. And that's what I felt like with this film. And I think the reason why is because there's a scene specifically where there's kind of an argument that happens between Benji and Ethan Hunt directly, and Benji literally directly comes out and says, like, I'm your friend. And I think that's why I responded so positively to this film, and why I was talking thematically about things like trust, and there's even some notions about friendship here. As corny as that sounds, I bought into it, and I felt this sense of camaraderie amongst all of these teammates. And even with Jeremy Renner and Ving Rhames returning in their roles, I think my biggest criticism here is maybe those two characters are not given as much to do in this film as I would have liked.
But when they're on screen together, they're really good.
Their comedic timing is perfect.
Really
they're
good.
really more given more comedic timing. I think more of the star of the film is the dialogue that all these characters share with each other, not so much the situations as it was in Ghost Protocol. But the reason why I still didn't feel that kind of detachment that you're talking about here is because I felt that sense of friendship and camaraderie with amongst this team, and that's why I was still able to roll with it. And I felt like this was the movie that had the most in terms of continuity with this franchise internally.
I will say that argument I can certainly buy into.
Sure.
And it's the camaraderie is, I think, the thing that does keep it together. That is the glue as far as it sticking within this franchise.
Yeah.
But narratively, there's really nothing going on that distincts this within this franchise. You could call it something completely different, and it's just another spy movie.
I agree.
And I guess that's what I'm talking about, is we've seen all these movies with the Ethan Hunt character, and I can understand what you're saying, Michael, as far as him being a spy, but in terms of just character work, I feel like it's hard for me to invest in this franchise and in this character to a deep level when they don't give me much, and every single film almost feels like another reboot outside of the camaraderie that you're talking about. So that for me is just my problem. And again, I just want to reiterate, it doesn't keep me from not liking these films. It's just what keeps me from loving it with a deep passion, I'll say, because I do have fun with them, and I like what Tom Cruise does with the Ethan Hunt character. The action sequences are always fantastic. That is not my problem. But I like continuity. It's what I've loved about what Marvel has done in giving us a grander, bigger world.
Sure.
I've loved that. Same thing with Star Wars. I like when franchises do that. For me, I can watch outside of Ghost Protocol, I can watch pretty much any of them on their own,
in any
give
order.
it a completely title, and it's irrelevant. Yeah, it's absolutely irrelevant.
Yeah, and I can absolutely see your point. And just the thing is, though, I think with this film is the first time I did feel that continuity, which I was really happy with.
See, I felt it more with Ghost Protocol than
I
any
felt it
other
a little
film.
bit there. I felt like it was starting there, and I felt like as far as the narrative weight within the characters, I feel like is where it started to continue with this film. And it's to the point now that I think we're inevitably getting MI6 at some point now. Even Tom Cruise has started talking about it.
He wants to do it.
It's to the point now that I feel like when that movie comes out, if and when it does, it's going to be the exact same team we got in this film. And
I hope so.
And I wouldn't want it any other way. That's exactly how I want it because it's already, I feel like it's established that continuity, and I just want it to keep going now. I think we finally have the footing there.
I've liked all of them. They've all had their place, but I think Ghost Protocol is what kind of re-grabbed my attention.
Yeah,
sure.
I think for many
Really
people
liked
it did
everything
too.
that went on with that one. And I kind of had that same feel or vibe with Rogue Nation. And I wouldn't mind seeing more of this than the past three.
I would agree with that. I would actually agree with that. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about my reactions to almost like a brief retrospective with the other films. Because as I mentioned, I grew up with this franchise. I loved it. I was not a big fan of 2, as most people I think are in that same boat. I'm actually not a big fan of Mission Impossible 3 either. I felt like that was where the franchise just really started running out of steam. But Ghost Protocol just really got me back into it. I mean, there are still maybe some minor problems with that film. But what I loved about that film, I think, is still reestablished here. I don't think this film is bigger than Ghost Protocol. I think Ghost Protocol was a much bigger film, even when it treated the smaller action scales. It felt so scaled up, and I think that was really what I loved about what Brad Bird brought to that film. But this film, I felt a sense of consistency with it, and I like that continuity as well. I really want to see this, what Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation have done. If they're going to continue this franchise, I want it to stay within that wheelhouse that they've already established with these 2 films.
I would agree with that, but I do want them to give me more of a sense of a serialization other than just the camaraderie. I want more of it tying it together, but in general, I agree with you. One thing I do want to talk about, just to switch gears a little bit, is I want to talk about the story, because while on the surface, there's nothing really new here. In fact, I found it extremely predictable. But besides that, I feel like it is complicated. It is a twisty plot, as you would expect, with some intricate schemes thrown in there. But what I like about this version of it is it's pretty clear, and it's more coherent, I feel like, than a lot of the previous Mission Impossible or just spy movies in general.
Yeah.
And so I'll give this screenplay a lot of credit for that. And I love how there's some really good character work here. I know you were kind of touching on this earlier, Brendan, but especially with the Rebecca Ferguson character, who was my favorite in this movie.
She is the backbone of it. She's the Charlize Theron of this film. She is
she's so good, because there is a confliction with her character as this British agent. She has these allies, but she's undercover. It makes everything very complicated, and as the story moves forward, her allegiances become even more conflicting, and I liked that about this. I liked that back and forth ambiguity. It very much worked for me.
Yes, and what I love so much about it is that you can feel that sense of conflict within herself completely. Like she's going through this. There are times that you can tell watching her character, she herself doesn't really know which side that she should be on.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back in hand what I was talking about the film thematically about trust. And I think that also goes hand in hand with, the idea of this syndicate that's growing underneath our very nose. Kind of echoes what I loved about a film like, Captain America the Winter Soldier, echoes some pretty interesting political aspects in some of these great political spy thrillers we used to get. And I like that notion. And at the same time, I like the notion that, what the syndicate is essentially doing, they don't spend so much time explaining their quote unquote evil motives. And when you hear the villain played by Sean Harris here kind of briefly explain his motives, they do it in a way that I don't want to say they make you sympathize with him, but it kind of makes you question that. So what he's actually doing, I get what he's doing. I get his motivation. So sometimes it starts pulling our trust with these characters in multiple directions. And I love that about this film, that it actually kind of engaged the audience within the story and almost made the audience a character here too. And I love the way that we started interacting with these conflicts, and I thought that was really cool. But just long story short, to get back to your original point, Rebecca Ferguson she's the meat of this film.
Yeah,
absolutely.
She's awesome. And like I said, she's my favorite part of the film, and she definitely stands out for me because I feel like a lot of female characters in this franchise are pretty much throwaway. So I hope that we do see more of her. But I also like how in a lot of ways she's Ethan Hunt's equal.
Yes.
And there is that mystery factor, as I was alluding to. And I love how her romantic angle is very, very limited, and the little that they throw in there, it actually plays really well thematically into her character and these ideas of finding peace I love.
There's that moment at the end, which we won't spoil, obviously, but there's a certain kind of embrace that happens that I found incredibly poignant, surprisingly poignant, and I think that goes back into that notions of how there's a fine line between trust and friendship, and I think that was that was a way to help set you free. Loved it.
Yeah, because those ideas of, and I'll put love in quotations, when that is brought up in this film, it's not so much about romance as much as it is about her finding peace.
Absolutely.
Because she's in the middle of something that she didn't really want to be in.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Anything to add to that, Michael?
For me, I think Ferguson was one of the best, but I also kind of liked how they finally did something with Peg.
Yeah, sure.
I kind of feel like he was another good character that they did something with. I really liked him in Ghost Protocol, but he was a background player, you know,
Sure.
and I kind of feel like he got a chance to step up and actually show character development, and
He certainly had a lot more to do here than he did in the previous film.
Yeah, and
for
I
sure.
even mentioned that conversation that he had about when he says to Ethan, "I'm your friend." But even physically, you know, he's really the sidekick in this entire movie as far as the team is concerned, because you don't really see Luther, Stickle, or even Brandt in the field that much in this film at all. They're kind of more in the background talking to these guys either via like a phone conversation or something like that. They eventually get into the field later on, but really Simon Pegg's character is the sidekick in this film, which I thought was really interesting that they got to focus on that brotherhood that that starts to feel like it's now establishing between Hunt and Benji, and then you had Rebecca Ferguson's character kind of intertwining between the two, creating that conflict there as well. But I loved having the two of them together because it allowed to focus on these two great characters, and I thought that was very well handled by McQuarrie.
I completely agree with that. I mean, that was some of the best pieces of the film for me too. Like, I really like that scene where Benji goes over to help Ethan Hunt, and Ethan Hunt essentially is like, "Okay, thanks for your help, but you got to go back." And he's like, "No, I'm staying."
Yeah, I love that.
So good. It's absolutely fantastic. And with the Ethan Hunt character, I also like these interesting dynamics, not just around those notions of friends and family that you're talking about, but there's this interesting idea that I found compelling about how he has met his match, so to speak, in the Solomon Lane character. I like how that is a thread that's thrown in here, and how he's always one step ahead of the Ethan character. And Ethan Hunt has always been a guy predicated on being the best. He's better than any other agent out there.
Yeah.
So to see him struggle with that, to me, is kind of fascinating. And there's a really great scene where the guys around him call him out on it.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty fantastically well done. I just wish that they would have explored more with that. I do feel like that idea isn't fleshed out terribly well, but it was enough that it still engaged me, and I found it interesting, like I said.
It does come off maybe a little bit superficial, and I do agree. That's one thing I would agree with that, and kind of even going off with the Solomon Lane character, I think one commonality with all of these films, and I think has been a criticism for me, is just the lack of a great villain. I think every single one of these films has had weak villains, even including Philip Seymour Hoffman is boring.
I disagree.
Great performance,
disagree.
Terrible character.
I disagree.
Oh, he did nothing in that.
I
film for me.
disagree a lot.
But anyway, I know most people would. But anyway, I would actually argue that Solomon Lane is my favorite villain of this franchise so far because of those moments you're talking about. I do wish we still would have gotten more of that though.
Yeah.
And
it's only, for me, it was only interesting in how it played into Ethan's character.
That's why it works.
Yeah.
But I do think Sean Harris's performance is actually rather chilling, and I think
I agree. I would agree with that.
I think that's another reason why I really like the character itself, and why I really like this villain. And also at the same time, as I mentioned, when they bring up his motivations, they don't spend a whole lot of time explaining it, but I kind of think that's a compliment here because it allows the audience to kind of get pulled between this issue of trust, and then we start seeing not the evilness in just his plan. I think that he actually makes some pretty interesting points about why they're doing this, because they want to keep the world well balanced between fear and fray. And I think, that was kind of interesting in and of itself. Like I said, we've seen that a lot in other political spy films and things like that. But I like the way it's done here because I think it helps create a sense of mystery within this villain that I was fascinated by him.
I like him too. I feel like Sean Harris portrays him, like you said, chilling, I think is a really great word to describe him, because he does have some harrowing qualities about him. I wouldn't say that I like him more than Philip Seymour Hoffman. I would just completely disagree, and we'll never agree on that, which is fine.
We never will.
Which is fine, but I think he might be my second favorite. I think,
even
though it is superficial, he does add some interesting layers to the character, speaking of Sean Harris, and I like how that character plays into Ethan Hunt's story arc as well. My biggest problem with it is he felt so much like a Bond villain to me. And again, it just adds to a lot of the Bond comparisons, because the story superficially is so much like a lot of Bond films we've seen in the past, which is okay. I think that's perfectly fine, and we'll have some fun conversation about Bond and Ethan Hunt later on.
Yeah, we will.
But outside of that, once I got past that, those motives, while cliche, there is an interesting little spark to them. And I like the way that Sean Harris plays that. So
yeah.
Before we get to final thoughts, though, let's talk about Tom Cruise. I'll toss it to you first, Michael. What did you think about Tom Cruise in this film?
He's doing a lot of good stuff. I didn't really think it was anything really new as far as the movies go. This time he kind of seemed like scared or weak, and I kind of dug that.
Okay, yeah. What about you, Brendan?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess you can say Ethan Hunt. I remember this is the first time we really maybe felt more of a humanity within the character of Ethan Hunt, which I guess was pretty interesting. But I mean, yeah, it's like Tom Cruise did it. He hung on a plane for real in this movie. He held his breath underwater for like, what was that, 6 minutes? I think it was, for real. He really did that. And it lends to a really spectacular set piece. With that whole underwater sequence that the trailers have only hinted at, and it's really well directed, because I was hoping when we went into it and Christopher McQuarrie was going to direct it like it was a single shot, and he did, and that's exactly what he did. But the fact that that Tom Cruise really puts himself there for the fan, and sometimes for himself, but also for the fans.
And for himself.
Yeah.
He's talked a lot about it.
He has. And in fact, there's a great line of dialogue that Alec Baldwin has in this film where he's talking about, he questions about the syndicate even being real or a figment of Ethan Hunt's imagination. And he even says about how Ethan Hunt likes to go out there and seek out his own ventures and his own excitement and his own adrenaline rush, essentially. Which I felt like he was essentially talking about Tom Cruise himself, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But no, Tom Cruise, he's a daring son of a gun. He's got a death wish or something. But the fact that he does that, and he allows it to, that risk-taking, to really echo here into establishing a decent character and creating a good performance here. And he's a movie star. The guy is a movie star. Yeah. And I think that's shown here very well.
Yeah, I think Tom Cruise, I mean, I can see where you're coming from, Michael. I just feel like in this, he's as good as he's ever been. And I feel like he is the engine that makes this film fly, so to speak. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting about it is Tom Cruise has this refusal to act his age and this refusal to change at all. I mean, he's like, 53 years old?
He's 53.
But he's still the maverick or the young Ethan Hunt that we love. And I think that epitomizes the Ethan Hunt character really well, because he's someone, speaking of Ethan Hunt, who has to overcome the impossible in every single one of these movies. And he does it by sheer, unvarnished willpower, which is a quality that these characters and these movies have always possessed. And at this point, I mean, this is like second nature to Tom Cruise. When he's hanging off those planes, or when he's underwater, like you were mentioning, Brendan, I feel like those are just activities he does all the time in real life. It was like
even the little things, like how he's like, he's strapped to that pole in the beginning of the film. He's doing those crunches to get up. It's like, oh my God, you made that look so easy.
He's done that. Oh, he's done that a million times before. But I will say, for me, I think it makes the film more tangible in that way, and it makes it very exciting to watch. And it also makes you wonder, how long can he keep this up? Are we going to see Ethan Hunt in his 70s and 80s? Like,
truthfully, knows? I think he could do it, man.
He might be able to, yeah.
And especially since
he's got that weird spark of, kid at heart.
Yeah,
I kind of think he does enjoy doing this. He seems to have fun as an actor. I think you see that, in his roles like Night and Day, stuff like that.
Yeah.
He enjoys what he does. It's fun for him. And I think it's kind of that old saying, as long as you're enjoying what you do, there's really no stopping you.
Yeah, sure.
I completely agree. And we talked about his age being 53, and the fact that he looks like he's probably 35. I know. He's like Mario Lopez. He doesn't age.
It's crazy. All right, guys, let's get to final thoughts and grades. We'll toss it to you first, Michael. Any final thoughts, and what grade would you give Mission Impossible Rogue Nation?
I'd definitely give it a 4. It's picking back up where I feel like Ghost Protocol stopped, and it's really pushing the franchise farther. So I would definitely one of the ones I've enjoyed watching.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
Yeah, I as far as I do have some maybe minor criticisms here, and as I mentioned, I do wish we got maybe more time with the villain. I wish we would have seen some maybe some more time in the field between the characters of Brant and Ving Rhames' character Luther. But they are given a lot to do, and there's a great humorous sight gag that happens where they're trying to locate Ethan Hunt, and it leads to this great driving sequence, this car chase. The funniest part of this whole movie. The theater erupted, but I do wish we would have gotten a little bit more of that. Another thing, and something tells me you might agree with this criticism, JD, was that I do feel like, as far from a pacing standpoint, the film, I feel like it feels like it just rushes right into the story. Like we get the story and the establishment of the story like within less than 10 minutes of the movie, and then the movie ends almost what feels like abruptly, like they're really trying to set something up for maybe like another movie to follow directly after this one, which leads to some kind of jarring pacing. And I think maybe we could have the movie's already over 2 hours, but if we wanted to try and trim some certain things back, I think we could have maybe focused more time on those bookends. And I think maybe that would have helped maybe mitigate some of your criticisms and maybe like reintroducing some of these characters and the situations they're currently in. But that's a minor thing. As far as how I'd rank this within the franchise, I still got to give Ghost Protocol the edge, but I might put this one second. I really enjoyed this movie, but I loved the old-fashioned spirit of it. You know, you're talking about how this felt like a James Bond film. To me, I felt like this was the first real, true adaptation of the 1960s television show. This felt very 60s for me, and as I mentioned, like I felt very film noir. I would have loved to see this movie like in black and white, especially some of those on-foot chase sequences in the shadows, and you got the fog there and everything like that, and like the streets of London and Vienna. It just felt so old school, and it was an influence and a tribute that I thought was utilized well and created a fresh take on this. And Christopher McQuarrie really likes to do that, and apparently he did that in Jack Reacher. I didn't see that. I didn't see that influence in Jack Reacher. I did not like that movie very much at all. But what he tried to apparently do with that film, I think he succeeds in spades here. So, at the very least, I would give this an A-, mostly just for the pacing issues, but that grade could end up going up, and I could easily sit through and watch this again over and over. I love this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much in the same boat with you guys in a lot of ways. I mean, I certainly do have my criticisms, and, you know, I know that you were saying that this is more like a 60s version of this, Brennan, and my comparisons to James Bond doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I've seen this formula done better in the James Bond movies, but I do like how they do, in some ways, almost directly reference it. I mean, like when you're going back to those scenes with the British Prime Minister, surely we've seen those in other franchises, but for me, I still think they executed it well. That scene with the British Prime Minister was hilarious.
I loved it.
And it adds to the story really well. It's not just a throwaway gag. And then we go directly from there to the climax. And, you know, I think when I was talking about how I wasn't wowed by this movie, I think it comes down to maybe expectations, because I hadn't read any reviews. I went into it pretty fresh, and then when I got the James Bond vibe from it pretty heavily, I felt like it just didn't distinguish itself enough for me on that level. But it doesn't have to be a bad criticism, because they do it pretty well.
Yeah.
And I think another thing why I wasn't wowed necessarily by it, as much as I love the motorcycle chase sequence or the one with the car, all of that was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Or the one with the plane. The water one that you really like, Brendan, I wasn't very much wowed by. And I think a lot of it comes to the CGI work, which I felt like was really weak.
I was just gonna say that, and I want to reiterate that I love that sequence mostly with how it was shot, but that is one of the first few times in this entire franchise where there's a big action set piece where you can notice the CGI.
Yeah,
you really can.
Incredibly noticeable for me. And I think it's because we're in a world where there's lots of practical stunts, because even the ending to the airplane sequence has this too. But in a world where you see practical all the time, it stands out. Very much like the dust storm in Fury Road.
Yeah.
I mean, that is going to stand out because you see practical everywhere. So that for me didn't work, although I do like the camera movements underwater. Yeah. That was very cool. But overall, I just wasn't wowed by the scene because the CGI was very jarring and almost kind of took me out of the film a little bit.
I will say one thing. I do think that this is the best motorcycle chase I've seen in a movie ever.
It's really cool.
Yeah, that was
awesome.
well done.
Yeah, it's very, very good. Overall, though, I still had a lot of fun with it. I like how, while the story is very predictable on the surface, there's not much to it that I really like, but you can peel back some layers here, and there are some really great character stuff.
Yeah.
If they piece that forward into future movies and they kind of give me that serialization that I want, I could come back to this movie and appreciate it a lot more because I do like it, and on a rewatch it has potential for me to come back and love it even more. So for me, in terms of my ranking, I would go Ghost Protocol, and it's not even close, and then I would probably say the first Mission Impossible and then this one. Okay. But again, this one has room to climb.
Yeah,
I do really like it. And if you want to read more of my thoughts, you can check out our Letterboxd page at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm.
And if you agree or disagree with our takes on Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, you can let us know by leaving a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/InSessionFilm, or you can tweet us at InSessionFilm. You can also leave us a comment on our Google Plus page or email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com if you choose to accept that.
Yes, and you better. On that note, the InSession Film Top 3 is next, and we're going to be discussing our top 3 90s action movies.
Welcome to The Rock.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Reflections on the water, more than darkness in the depths. See him surface in every shadow. On the wind I feel his breath. Golden eye, I found his weakness. Golden eye, he'll do what I please. Golden eye.
The InSession Film Top 3 is brought to you by the First Time Watchers podcast. And Brendan, of course, we just got done talking about Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. And just like that movie, it's impossible not to love.
Dun, 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 dun. That's Watchers. First time watcher. Yeah, we're gonna put both Bond and within this conversation.
It's appropriate for the show.
But that's how exciting it is. That's how exciting it is, and it's so exciting. And they're a great support of our show as well, and definitely a podcast out there. You guys got to check it out. And just in movies in general, hosted by Tim, Walter, and Romano, they really do know their movies, and I'd be very interested to hear what they say about Mission Impossible Rogue Nation.
Absolutely, because their banter is very amazing. It's so entertaining, just like Mission Impossible or even the Bond movies, which we'll talk about later in the show. So all of it, it's awesome. Check it out.
Oh, yeah, and their banter is just as amusing as the humor in a movie like Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which was top-notch. So I'm calling you guys top-notch. Be thankful.
Yes.
But they really are great. And also what's unique about them is that every week they will pick out a movie that they've never seen before, and they'll watch it and discuss it on their show to create this real fresh perspective on the movie, which I really think is probably the best part about them. I love that gimmick about them. And they also discuss other movies that they've seen, other trailers that they've seen recently, so it gets really movie heavy and it's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And they also give out some great movie recommendations at the end of the show that I would also pay attention to. And overall, the show, it's very smart, it's fluid, it's so easy to listen to, and you can tell they just have a blast on their show. So that being said, Brendan, where can you find these guys on the internet?
There are a couple ways. You can check them out at firsttimewatchers.blogspot.com, and also hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers, and also on Facebook. Just search for First Time Watchers.
And if you choose to accept, and you better, go subscribe to them on iTunes, and while you're there, leave them a review. I promise it's a show that is absolutely worth your time. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
Revenge, it's a kiss. This time I won't miss. Now I've got you in my sight.
On the Simplistic Reviews podcast, we talk movies. We talk TV. We talk.
Hello, Julie, what the heck are you doing?
Trying to make our spots sound more exciting by adding explosions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could have got the point across with sound effects, not the real thing.
Download this show on iTunes or at simplisticreviews.blogspot.com.
I'm sure your insurance company will cover that.
No, they won't.
No, they probably won't.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 128, and now we're going to be doing our top 3 for this week, and we're going to be doing our top 3 favorite 1990s action movies. And as JD, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, we sort of did this already back in May when Mad Max Fury Road came out, and we did our top 3 favorite 80s action films, because, you know, that's really where the Mad Max films kind of found its stride. But with the first Mission Impossible film coming out in 1996, I think it was, let's honor the next decade that came after. So before we get going, though, did you guys have any specific criteria that you used to select your list or anything like that? We'll toss it to you first, Michael.
I don't know. I have trouble keeping lists just because it's a mood thing.
I know the feeling.
You get in that spot where you're like, oh, I need to see like a lot of explosions.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to kind of do that.
Sure.
So no, I think it's just, I really don't think I have a criteria.
That's fair enough. It's a pretty simple list or at least a simple concept for a list as it is, and that's perfectly fine. I might be in that same boat too, but how about you, JD? Any specific criteria?
Yeah, I had some criteria, and I wanted to keep mine very similar to what I did with our 80s list.
Me too.
Just for consistency purposes more than anything else. So I did include cross-genre stuff, which I did for the 80s. I also included the Mad Max films for that 80s list as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for this one, I did include the Mission Impossible movies. They were very much eligible for this.
The first one, at least.
The first one, at least, which came out in the 90s, of course.
Yeah.
What I did, very similar to like I did with the 80s list, there are some films that I kept off. So I'm going to call this my Bad Boys memorial list. Because I've talked about Michael Bay's Bad Boys movies a lot, so I didn't include that one. I didn't include Terminator 2 Judgment Day because we talked about that one a few weeks ago.
Right.
So I wanted to keep that one off. And I also didn't include Independence Day, if you consider that an action movie. Again, one that's been talked about on this show a lot, especially from me. So I wanted to keep my list in that vein, and I also threw in a fun special pick that I'll talk about because I'll very much have to explain why I chose it, but we'll get to that here in a minute.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you there, JD, and I wanted to keep this as consistent as possible with our previous top 3 80s action films that we did earlier this year. But yeah, like you, I'm also going to make this my Terminator 2 memorial list, and not just because we just got off to talking about the Terminator franchise and our extra film retrospective, and even with Terminator Genesis coming out earlier this year. But I wanted to, like my previous top 3 list with the 80s films, I wanted to focus on action films that felt like they were action films first rather than sci-fi films first.
Yeah.
And I would argue
very much
Terminator is sci-fi first versus action.
Okay.
But now there is one film on my list that has sci-fi elements to it, but I would still argue it's action first, sci-fi second, and I'll get to that in a little bit later.
Yeah.
I also, just to throw out there, like there are some great films that came out in the 90s, like people be thinking like, oh, like for example, like Michael Mann's Heat, which is an awesome movie.
Yeah.
I consider that more of a crime drama than an action
Me
film.
too.
So I won't be, so don't be like bent out of shape if I like don't call out movies like that or In the Line of Fire or Ronin, because I consider those more like crime dramas more than anything else. But I wanted to keep it really in the strict action wheelhouse, and I think it's gonna be a good discussion. I'm looking forward to it. But let's get going, man. Michael, what is your number 3?
Oh man, Face Off.
Ooh,
Wait, you good looking. You're hot. It's like looking in a mirror, only not.
Troy?
Now that is between us, okay?
But you were...
In a coma? Nothing like having your face cut off to disturb your sleep. Read the newspaper lately?
You killed them?
Well, look, beats paying the bill, huh? Come on, I mean, if a facelift costs $5,000. See anything you like?
I've always kind of been a fan of Cage and Travolta, but that movie was just, it had a lot of good action scenes, you know, shootouts, blowing up. Cage is just...
Cage.
The guy's an enigma.
He let him off the leash for that one. I thought both did an awesome job when they were supposed to be switching places.
Sure.
So that just kind of, that always sticks with me. Just the crazy scenes of Cage and just the overall playthrough for it.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to bounce off of that a bit because I just want to say, like, as a director, John Woo, who directed this film, I have never been a fan of his. And I don't like what he did with Mission Impossible 2. In fact, a lot of his earlier films with Chow Yun-fat, such as Hard Boiled and even the original Bullet to the Head, I never really cared too much for those films. However, I want to bounce off of this because, as I mentioned, I do have a film on my top 3 that does incorporate some sci-fi elements, even though it is an action film first, I think. And that film is Face Off. Face Off is also my number 3.
Interesting.
I love this film. This is the only John Woo film I really felt like his kind of corny slow motion style really actually played well with this kind of quirky sci-fi element. And the story actually does take itself seriously at times. It gets into a nice inner psychology and how John Travolta's character of this cop is essentially getting to know his adversary while trying to play him. I thought that interesting juxtaposition was really cool. And Michael, I think you hit the nail on the head about, especially with Nicolas Cage and even John Travolta here. They have a lot of fun with this movie, and their performances really show it. And the way that, like John Travolta especially, I think, is hilarious in this film. You know, when he's first introduced after the places have been switched, he's like, "Were you good looking? You hot?" Like I love that. I love that. And the action sequences are great. I especially love, the climax, like the scene, on the boats and the boat chase that it leads up to, I think is really, really well done. And I love the concept. I think the concept's great. So yeah, this is also my number 3. So I just wanted to bounce in there. Yeah.
Very cool. For my number 3, I'm going to go outside the wheelhouse a little bit.
There we go.
I'm going to lose some people here, but I will explain why I chose this because, there are, of course, a bunch of great 90s action movies. We can talk about The Matrix. We can talk about Die Hard with a Vengeance or Mission Impossible all day long. But
I'm scared.
I'm going somewhere different for this one because I just felt like having fun with it. Okay, Brendan? So this kind of goes against your criteria as far as maybe being another genre first, but then having action in it. But I don't care because I think for its genre, it has a lot of great action in it. I'm going with, and I know I'm going to lose you, but just stick with me, Disney's Mulan for my number 3.
Really?
Yes. I love this movie. And yes, it's an animated film, but if you go back and watch it, there are a lot of action sequences in it. And it has what I would argue is one of the best heroines we've seen on screen because she's not only strong physically, but she has a lot of heart and she has a lot of courage. She has a lot of motivation to save her family. And in the process, she finds herself, she finds her identity, all while saving her country, all at the same time. She does become a force to reckon with, which I love about it because there was a lot of opportunities for her to fail or for her to quit, but she fights through it and she's facing an intimidating opponent that is more than twice her size. And in the end, she overcomes those odds, which were absolutely stacked against her, and she saves more than just her family. And it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story with a lot of heart, but it also has a lot of action sequences. There's a great training montage with a really great song that I love. There's a fantastic mountain battle that I think is pretty intense for an animated film, especially for a Disney one. And then, of course, there's that climax ending sequences that has some great humor in it, but also I think adds some really great stuff thematically to the film as well. And I think that character, Mulan, she's just an amazing heroine, animated or not. And I think the film is completely underrated. I love it. And I know I'm going outside the wheelhouse for this pick because I wanted to do something different. But it's a film I love and one that I think fits this list for me personally anyway.
Don't do that. No, and this is what I'm saying. Don't build up the fact that you're going so out of the wheelhouse and then pick a pick like that. And I actually agree with your pick. I can see your point. I can absolutely see your point. This is an action film. I would say this is Disney's rendition of like a Braveheart.
Yeah,
is the way I always saw this.
Yeah.
Just with a female lead versus a Mel Gibson lead.
Sure.
But I would definitely see your arguments, and I could agree with that. So.
All right.
At least maybe the majority of people think, what the heck is wrong with you, man? Picking a Disney movie for a 90s action film. But I can absolutely see your point.
Hey.
Maybe I'm being too polite, but it's a great movie. It really is.
I think so too. And it really does have a lot of action in it. I think the Braveheart comparison is really spot on. It just has a different culture and a female heroine, but a lot of the same stuff. And I think it's great. I love it. So.
I gotta agree with you. It's a really good movie. You've just now like completely destroyed my list where I'm like, oh my God, but there's so many more options now.
Yeah, for sure. There are.
Well, anyway, let's take a commercial break. We'll be back in 10 minutes to finalize our list now. Thanks to you and your Disney pick, Katie.
So sorry. I wanted to be a little different.
You hipster.
Different's good, but now I'm like in a brain freeze of all these other great movies.
I know,
Well, you got to quickly get out of that brain freeze because I'm excited. I want to keep going. So let's get to number 2. Michael, tossing it to you, man. Get out of your brain freeze. What do you have at number 2?
Pick 2. I'm gonna have to go with something. It's action to me, but it's got a lot of serious comedy to it.
Sure.
It's called Big Hit.
Big Hit.
It's Lou Diamond Phillips, Mark Wahlberg. Again, it's Hitman for Hire, but there's so much comedy to it, and I really dug the difference. Mark Wahlberg wasn't just some shoot-all guy, you know. I really dug his character in that one.
I have not seen this one.
I haven't either, actually.
Oh, man, it's really good.
Huh.
Like I said, Mark Wahlberg's just kind of a hitman trying to, you know, work during the day as a hitman, but then come home to his wife, Christina Applegate. And she's just very like, babe, where's the bill money? Where's this? Mom and dad are coming. And he's constantly abysmal throughout the entire movie because his stomach's just killing him.
Huh.
And so there's all of this comedy to it, but you've got Lou Diamond Phillips and just really good cast.
Interesting. And I'm looking at it now. Even Elliot Gould is in it too. It's like, and I don't know who the director, Kurt Wong. I don't think I've seen any of his work, but yeah, I've heard of this film. I think I remember when it was out. I was 8 years old when this came out, but I've never seen it. But maybe this is one we got to add to our list, man.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'd say let's have a movie party. Let's have a big hit party. But that's an interesting pick, Michael. I've never seen it, but you definitely kind of sold me on it. I'm very curious. Definitely sparked my curiosity. But anyway, JD, what's your number 2, man?
My number 2, I'm going to a film that I love. I would argue that it might be this director's best movie, and I think for a lot of people, they may consider that. For my number 2, I'm going with Michael Bay's The Rock.
Oh man, I thought that was gonna be number 1. I was gonna do a 10-to-1 odds on that being number 1. I guess I lost a bunch of money.
I love this. We were kind of joking earlier when you guys were talking about Nick Cage and Face Off and him being Nick Cage. I think this is maybe the most Nick Cage has ever been Nick Cage.
What about Con Air?
Con Air, you could argue that for sure, but I think this one is up there as well.
Yeah,
this movie is a lot of fun. I do think it has a really interesting script. I like the way Michael Bay shoots it. It definitely has that intensity that he is really good at when it comes to these scenes. And I think what really stands out for me here too is the chemistry between Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
I love it's so great because Sean Connery is of course this badass British agent who's been in jail for a long time, and Nick Cage is just this chemist who has never been in the field before. He has no idea what he's doing, which is funny in itself. But he has this sarcasm that he brings to this movie that I absolutely love. I mean, there's the whole prom queen joke, but I think a scene that really stands out for me is when the Sean Connery character is basically asking him, what happens if this gas gets out? Like if this chemical weapon gets out.
Yeah.
And essentially Nick Cage, his character goes on to say, well, it stops the brain from sending nerve messages to your spinal cord within 30 seconds. He says your muscles freeze, you can't breathe, you spasm so hard, you break your own back and spit out your own guts, but that's after your skin melts off. The way that he delivers that dialogue is hilarious, and it's so good. And it's like that. Like even when he's being serious, he's being very funny. Like when he's yelling at this soldier near the climax of the movie, he's like glass or plastic, glass or plastic.
I swear, Nicolas Cage is an enigma. He's an enigma. He's a mystery to me. But
it's so funny to me. So like I just die laughing even when he's being serious and when he's joking. But I just love that chemistry he has. It's a fun story. It's well shot. I even like the villains too. Like Ed Harris' character especially is very conflicted.
Yeah.
Because his motives are very, very valid, I think. Very, very valid. But of course the way he goes about dealing with it, maybe not so great. But I love that confliction because he's not about killing people.
Right.
He's just more about getting justice. And so it makes for this interesting dynamic that I love. So I
Yeah.
think the story just comes around. I mean, of course, the mystery behind the Sean Connery character is great too. I love it. Anyway, I could talk about it all day, but The Rock is my number 2.
This would have been my number 4, so it just missed my list.
Yeah.
But this might be my favorite Michael Bay film.
I
it's-
think for a lot of people it is.
Yeah, this was released on the Criterion Collection too. I think at one point, along with Armageddon.
Yeah.
So at least those guys like Michael Bay.
I mean, those two are a lot of fun though. So I mean,
They
despite
are.
whatever he's done lately, those ones.
I think
still
The
work.
Rock is a tighter film though. I think it's probably one of his tightest films and is more consistent in tone and doesn't go over the top in drama, maybe
Yeah.
like a film like Armageddon does, which I kind of like that about that film. But
Me too.
But I love The Rock. I think it's incredibly entertaining.
And that's why I'm excited for his new movie coming out, because it seems like he's going to be grounded
It
in
seems
this world
more
again.
rock-ish, but I mean, remember the last time Michael Bay delved in history, it turned into Pearl Harbor.
Which is another debate we'll have at another time.
We will. We've had that debate, and I want to drink after we. But anyway, for my number 2, I'm going to keep this very brief because we just finished talking about the 5th film in this franchise. But I have to go with the first Mission Impossible for my number 2.
It's good.
It's not even just that it's good. It's like I said, it's nostalgic for me because this is one of the few action films in the 90s that really kind of got me into the notion of interesting action filmmaking. And when you watch this movie now, it surprisingly holds up very well. And I mean, you can notice some of the special effects in certain things, but like that train sequence at the end still looks pretty awesome. It still really does hold up fairly well.
Yeah.
And then it also probably has what is still my favorite set piece of the entire franchise so far, which is the invasion of the CIA. I love that. And it's so quiet. I love that. But at the same time, the way it kind of introduces this world, it's a very convoluted plot. And I think that's really my only criticism here. I think it's a very interesting introduction to this world. And even so, like, better films came up out of it. Ghost Protocol is still my favorite of the franchise. Rogue Nation, I may even like better than the first one now. But as a 90s action film, I have a lot of nostalgia for Mission Impossible. When I first saw this, it was so different for me as far as action films go. And I love that it balanced at over-the-top action with this kind of small-scale Hitchcockian espionage kind of vibe.
Sure.
And the balance was well. Brian De Palma did a good job balancing that.
I agree.
So yeah, that's why my number 2 is the first Mission Impossible.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, it would be the second in the franchise for me personally, and my only criticism would be what you said. It's a little convoluted, so it's a little hard to follow at times, but besides that, I mean, and once you figure it out on some rewatches, it's really awesome. I love it, and the action set pieces are fantastic.
Yeah, and I actually think the convoluted plot and the convoluted nature of these films is kind of a charm with these films. I feel like it's kind of a gimmick, but I do think it went a little too much in this film, like it was calling attention to itself. But that's a minor criticism. I'm not going. We're not reviewing that film. The point is that I'll love this film forever.
It's
because
a good pick.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, let's get to the nitty gritty now. Michael, what do you have as your number 1 favorite action film from the 90s?
This one's hard because, like you guys were talking about earlier, you have cross-genre, Predator, Matrix, and all that.
Sure.
But if I, try really, really hard and just focus down to, shootouts and what have you, I'm going to go with Desperado.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know. There was this weird, poetry to everything he did. It just, I don't know. It was one of my favorite characters that he did. And plus, Cheech Marin, the thousands of bullets that they were dropping throughout the movie.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've seen this one. I think I'm actually more fresh on the film that came after that. What was it? Once Upon a Time in Mexico, I think it was called, which I was not a fan of that film. But
I really try not to remember that one.
Yeah, it was. We talk about convoluted storylines in Mission Impossible. I mean, that Mission Impossible's child's play compared to that convoluted mess that Once Upon a Time in Mexico was. But it's been a while since I've seen Desperado, but I remember I really did enjoy it. And that's, you make an interesting point about bringing that up in this list, because I didn't even think about that film. I always kind of looked upon that as almost like a Western in many ways, or like a crime Western, I guess, but maybe that might be a bit superficial. But, it's a very enjoyable film from what I remember. I'd have to give it a rewatch to see how it would really compare to my list. But, that's a really interesting pick. That is a good pick, though. You got me more intrigued to rewatch it now. How about you, JD? What is your number 1 90s action film?
My number 1 actually didn't take a whole lot of thought. I think it's a quintessential 90s viewing, whether you like the genre or not, but I think it's wonderful.
Please don't say the same one I have.
Well, we'll see. My number one is Catherine Bigelow's Point Break.
Oh, yes.
Okay, man. Okay. I'm screwed. I'm gonna go to jail, and I'll pay, and Johnny Utah gets this guy. Right? Good for you. That's real good. You're gonna be a big hero now. But look at it, Johnny. Look at it! This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, man. Just let me go out there. Let me get one wave before you take me. One wave. I mean, where am I gonna go, man? Cliffs on both sides. I'm not gonna paddle in New Zealand. My whole life has been about this moment, Johnny. Come on, compadre. Come on. Come on!
Yes, I love this movie. Of course, this is a film that launched Keanu Reeves as the action star. I love how he's young, dumb, and full of you-know-what, but he is this FBI agent, and he gets caught up in this undercover assignment, which is awesome because it creates this really interesting dynamic with Patrick Swayze's character that becomes complex. Swayze is the villain of the film, but he's also friend and mentor to the Keanu Reeves character, and it opens up these new layers to his identity that he didn't necessarily know about before. So it makes the mystery more fascinating, but also very personal at the same time. And I think the action sequences are affected by that dynamic. The action is great on its own, and the stakes are high, but it's not just because they may be skydiving at 10,000 feet. The stakes are added because of those relationship layers that I thought were explored really, really well by Catherine Bigelow here. And so that's why it makes my number one. I mean, and don't get me wrong, because those set pieces are a lot of fun. And Gary Busey is a riot in this movie.
Oh, I love Gary Busey.
He's so great. But all those characters have purpose, and it's interwoven so beautifully for me. This is just genre gold. It's easily one of my favorites of the 90s, and I would recommend this to anybody.
I gotta agree with you. That's definitely one of those must-see films.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very it defines 90s action. Like this is definitely like a textbook 90s action film when you really think about it. And it's also fun to know that Keanu Reeves actually learned to surf for this movie. And I was I thought that was really interesting. But this is another honorable mention for me. So we didn't pick the same one. I thought because you're going on about this is like quintessential 90s action filmography right here, and I thought, he's gonna pick my same one because I would argue that about my number one. But Point Break is a very exciting film, and I love Patrick Swayze in one of his great roles after Dirty Dancing. But and I bet you're looking forward to the remake later this year.
Well, I will say a really cool story that happened because of the remake, because my wife and I saw the trailer and I was like, oh my God, this looks so horrible. I'm not interested in it at all. But my wife was kind of intrigued by the idea. And so I told her it was a remake based off of this movie in 1991. So that night, the same night that we came home from watching that movie, she watched Point Break on her own. She pulled it up herself. I didn't even make her or force her, nothing. It was one of the most proud moments I've ever had being a husband.
I want to find her and give her a high five.
I couldn't have been more prouder. Like, it was so great.
And
she liked it too.
I was going to ask, what did she think? Because that's the burning question. But she liked it.
She liked it.
Can we do a throwback review and have her on the show and just do this? That'd be a good extra film show when we if we want to talk about that instead of the remakes.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's that side topic. But
it was really
I'm glad
cool.
she liked it.
Yeah.
But anyway, for my number one, you're talking about quintessential, like textbook 90s action films, and Point Break is definitely one of them. And I would argue that my number one is also one of those for a lot of the same reasons you were talking about. And again, it's kind of a nostalgic pick for me with my number one, kind of a lot for the same reasons I was talking about with the first Mission Impossible. It's one of those films that when I first saw it at a young age, it kind of got me into the excitement of action films. And keep in mind, I probably saw this film when I was way too young. And also, coincidentally, it also stars Keanu Reeves. And your number one, I gotta go with 1994's Speed.
Yeah.
Okay! We got a wad! Pretty big!
There's a pretty big wad.
Brass fittings!
Brass fittings.
I think I can reach the circuit wire.
He can reach the circuit wire.
No, don't. That's a decoy. Classic.
That's your classic decoy.
What else?
What else?
Hold on.
Hold on.
Me.
Oh, darn.
Harry, there's enough C4 on this thing to put a hole in the world.
Okay, all right, just stay calm. What else?
3 triggers, one on the axle I can't really see, a cellular remote, and a timer running off a wristwatch.
Watch? What kind of watch?
Gold. Gold band, fairly cheesy.
Officer?
And then this was no contest for me. This was miles and away my number one. The only competition I think it would have had in the 90s is probably Terminator 2, and I left that off the list.
Sure.
But Speed is so... It's a bruised forearm movie because you grab the arm of the person sitting next to you when you watch it. Even when it has to, launch over that 50-foot gap. I know it wasn't possible in real life, but I didn't give a
Hey, that's fun.
Yeah. But at the same time, like aside from that sequence, the movie is surprisingly well grounded in this in this notion that this bus has to weave through all this traffic and stay above 50 miles per hour, or else this bomb is going to go off. That is just such a cool sequence, and it also introduces Dennis Hopper as one of the best villains, I think, of a 90s action film ever. He scares the living crap out of me in this film. And also, rest in peace, Dennis Hopper. And surprisingly, I actually kind of buy into this corny romance between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. And speaking of someone who doesn't age like Tom Cruise, Sandra Bullock doesn't age either. She
looks so good.
She was in her late 20s in that film, and she was gorgeous there, and she's still gorgeous today. And she's like close to 50. I don't even know if she is 50. She's in at least late 40s.
She's close if she's not.
Yeah, but she still looks great.
Yeah.
But what I love so much about this film is kind of like this 3-act structure that it follows, because you got this first sequence within an elevator, and then you've got the whole bus sequence, which drives the main thing of the story. And then when you think the movie's done, then they go into the freaking subway and they have their own freaking story there, and it just keeps going, but you never get worn out because you're so engaged with this story, and you kind of like these characters, and you even get to know all the characters on the bus too. They all have distinct personalities.
Sure.
Like Alan Ruck is hilarious in this film.
I
forget the actor's name who plays Mortiz, but they call him Gigantor. I love that. Like this is my pick for quintessential 90s action films, as far as when you define it as a textbook terminology. I love this film. I can watch it over and over again. I just recently bought it at Best Buy on Blu-ray because it was in the $5 section. I was like, hell yeah. Nice. Just don't watch the second film. Just don't watch Speed 2 Cruise Control.
Exactly. That's terrible.
What a waste of not only Sandra Bullock, but Willem Dafoe. What a waste of him as a villain. But yeah, Speed, my number one. Love it.
I will say I actually had this at my number 3 for a long time.
Until you wanted to be different.
Until I wanted to be different, because this film is very good. We've had some fun comments on Twitter about this movie and a lot of other Keanu Reeves movies better be mentioned on the show. So
sure.
I wanted to throw that out there as this was in my top 3, even given my criteria. But I went with a fun pick for my number 3 that I think is still deserved, but I wanted to be a little different. But I will say that this is a solid pick for all the reasons you're talking about. I don't care how implausible some of these sequences are or whatever. It's great. It's a fun story. It's simple. It's executed really well. And it's the first rated R movie I think I ever watched.
Actually, it might be for me as well. It's one of them. There's one I have as an honorable mention that actually is my first R-rated film, but at the same time, this is one of my top 3 first R-rated films, and it was kind of a coming of age moment for me to watch an R-rated action film, as depressing as that sounds. But there's a lot of story to tell there. I'm not going to get into that now. But anyway, did you guys have any honorable mentions that you want to quickly toss out? How about you, Michael? We'll toss to you first.
Oh man. I cannot think of any right off the top.
Okay, how about you, JD?
I had a few. Of course, I had Speed, as we just talked about, and I'll just throw in Terminator 2. Terminator 2 probably would be my number 1 on a true list.
Me too.
I love that one. Bad Boys, of course, if I was going to include that. The Matrix is really good. I really like Die Hard with a Vengeance. I just love the humor in that film. Sam Jackson is awesome. I really enjoy it quite a bit. The Long Kiss Goodnight. Mission Impossible. You can throw in GoldenEye. There's a lot more we could talk about, but I guess I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I kind of like Die Hard with a Vengeance. That was almost an honorable mention for me, but I don't like Jeremy Irons as the villain in that film. I don't like the motivation of that. But that's beside the point.
I have fun with it.
It's a good movie overall, mostly
Sure.
because of Samuel L. Jackson, but it's nowhere near close to the first Die Hard, at least. And I wish that's an 80s film, so I can't put it on this list. But
I like real fast. I think what I love about it too is Sam Jackson is fun like he always is.
Oh yeah,
but he's not the badass that he is in a lot of his movies too. He's kind of the vulnerable guy.
He's got a family, he's got kids, and
he dies without Bruce Willis. So it's great though.
I love that. Yeah, but a lot of the films we already mentioned, I had as honorable mentions, like The Rock, and you mentioned GoldenEye. Point Break would be one for me. I haven't seen True Lies in a while, and I wanted to have a James Cameron film on here, but it's been a while since I've seen that, so I didn't feel fresh
Same
on
here.
it.
Yeah.
But the last one I had, and I mentioned my first R-rated film I've ever seen, was Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone. But the fact I couldn't put it on this list because despite being a good movie and despite me loving John Lithgow as the villain, I think he's one of the best villains of the 90s as far as action films go. The movie itself, I think, it's not great, and I think there are other better ones that I had here. So, but first R-rated film I saw, so there's nostalgic reasons for it. But yeah.
All right, well, let us know how your picks stack up against ours. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. You can leave a comment on Facebook or Twitter or on our site at InSessionFilm.com.
All right, before we move on, let's talk about this week's poll.
Real bad, okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, so for our poll this week, we asked, what's your favorite film starring Tom Cruise? And the films that we listed here were Risky Business, Top Gun, Rain Man, Born on the 4th of July, A Few Good Men, Jerry Maguire, Minority Report, Collateral, Edge of Tomorrow, and then we also had the write-in option there. And this is a very tight list because because there's a lot of films that he's in, a lot of supporting roles that are great. Like, for example, my favorite movie, Magnolia, I think would have been something I would have liked to see put here, but films starring Tom Cruise we had to focus on, and I think we had a pretty surprising list of results come in. At least I think you voted a lot. I think
I didn't. I only voted once, and actually I didn't even vote for the winner.
I am so surprised by that.
I know.
But anyway, not surprising, coming in at 35% winning this poll was Top Gun, and not surprising there. That's a classic for a good reason.
I love that one though.
Oh, I love that film too. Coming in at second place with 21%. But this one actually did surprise me. It was Edge of Tomorrow, and maybe I don't know if it's because
it's new.
Maybe it's because it's new and fresh. And to be honest, I actually wasn't a huge fan of that film. But that's beside the point. But then coming in at third place, 15% was A Few Good Men, a film that is. I finally saw for the first time not too long ago, and I loved it. I feel bad that it's been taking so long for me to finally see it, but that's also not a huge surprise. But there are a lot of a lot of people pick that one, and for good reason. It's a great film, great ensemble piece too.
I agree. And while we focus mostly on the films that he starred in, we had quite a few write-ins for Magnolia. A lot of people like that film and him in it, and that does qualify for your favorite film. That's why we left in the write-in option. Even though we focus mostly on the ones he starred in.
Yeah, we wanted to focus on what quote unquote a Tom Cruise film, and I feel like that's a PTA film more than anything else. But you can make that argument either way. I think
but he is in it, so if it's your favorite
he gives his best performance ever, I think, in that film, easily.
Yeah, very good stuff. All right, guys, coming up next, we are going to continue a segment we call InSession Film Showdown, and we'll see which spy has the biggest, we'll say, punch, Ethan Hunt or James Bond. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey guys, just want to pause for a quick second to say a huge thank you to those that are supporting the show. We really, really do appreciate it. And there's several different ways you can help us. One thing that you can do is go to our website at InSessionFilm.com, click on that big bonus content tab in our main menu, and there you'll be able to check out all of our bonus content for just a small donation of 99 cents. It actually is free to listen to, but we do encourage and appreciate that small donation. It really goes a long way. Another way that you can help us out is Patreon.com. Patreon is a great source where you can sign up to donate per show, and you'll get free stuff in the process. And who doesn't like free stuff? There's a couple different levels there, and the further the level you go, the more stuff that you'll get, and it's a really great resource. We love it, so definitely go check us out there at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. And as you heard up at the top of the show, you can also just donate directly to the show via PayPal at InSessionFilm.com/donate. You'll see the PayPal button there, and you can either donate one time or sign up for a monthly subscription. And no matter what you do, we really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. And on the subject of getting some stuff, I mean, who doesn't like to get stuff in general, whether you're getting it for free or you're buying it? Because there's a way you can do that with us by going to the InSession Film store at InSessionFilm.com/store. We've got a lot of cool collateral there for you to pick from, such as a cool tie, a mug, an iPhone case with our logo slapped right on it. It's very interesting. We can also customize something for you. If you don't see an item there that you like, just let us know. We can work on getting that done for you. But yeah, we've got a lot of great stuff there, and we would really appreciate some support there as well, and also help promoting us at the same time. We'd appreciate that. And lastly, as you would see from our website, we are sponsored by Audible.com. With Audible, if you go to audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm, you could get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial by simply going there and signing up. There are over 150,000 titles for you to choose from, and you can have it for either your iPhone, Android Kindle, or your MP3 player, whatever your smart device or just general device might be. I mean, perhaps you want to start reading up on the latest Star Wars collateral, as I keep mentioning over and over again, because we keep on getting closer and closer and closer to Force Awakens Day.
Getting there.
It's a holiday now. I've deemed that, but there's a lot of great Star Wars collateral coming out, and I'm sure Audible will be very helpful in getting you caught up with that collateral as well. Definitely a lot of stuff to check out. Please do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just a like on Facebook or a follow on Twitter or a subscription on iTunes, it all really goes a long way, and we really do appreciate everybody's support.
Hi, this is Greg.
This is Chuck.
And this is Dan. And we are Talking in Circles.
Because the world needs another podcast, we are here as Geekcast Radio's newest edition. And as the title says, each week we get lost in conversation about a wide range of topics, including movies, comics, games, art, TV, and even occasionally sports.
We play games and discuss pivotal topics like who would win in a fight, the Kool-Aid Man or Tony the Tiger, and examine the hot-button issues of the world of geekdom.
We keep things fresh by taking timeless topics in new directions. We are simply three friends having a fun time talking about life's most fascinating foibles.
Stay connected with us every Tuesday on iTunes or at geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 128, and now we're going to be continuing a segment we call InSession Film Showdown.
Who is he?
He's a 00. Kill first, ask questions later. I think he's a blunt instrument whose primary method is to provoke and confront.
Welcome back, Mr. Hunt. There are four types of people who join the military. For some, it's family trait. Others are patriots, eager to serve. Then there's the kind who want a legal means of killing other people. James Miller is one of those. This man and I have some unfinished business.
All right, guys, for this segment, this is something where we pick two topics. Brendan and I, we banter and argue for them, and then we have a fun guest that comes in and pretty much gives us the winner. And for our showdown this week, it's going to be a little bit interesting. Of course, we've been talking about Ethan Hunt, And the Mission Impossible films, I was talking about James Bond earlier in the review, and we were talking about how that film kind of reminisces James Bond a little bit.
Sure.
And so we felt like that was pretty appropriate going into this segment. So, but what we're going to do, because James Bond has so many different movies, right? They've had, 23 of them?
24 coming. 24 if you're going to include Spectre coming out later this year.
They've had a lot of films, so to make it a little bit more fair, we're just going to focus on the Daniel Craig versions of the James Bond movies. So the reboot starting with
Casino
Royale, and we'll go from there. So, and then, of course, all of the Mission Impossible movies that we've seen.
Sure.
So that's where we're going to focus for this argument. I will be arguing for Ethan Hunt. Mr. Brennan Cassidy will be arguing for James Bond.
I will.
Brendan, let's start with you, man. Give us your argument for James Bond.
All right, well, the first thing I want to say is that, in case people are kind of questioning, this is not going to be like the battle that we did before with, like, Jurassic Park versus Terminator. This is not going to be about the films themselves. It's going to be more about the character. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because I love Casino Royale. I love Skyfall. And I think Quantum of Solace is one of the top 10 worst films I've ever seen in my entire life. I seriously think the film is garbage. It's trash, and that's even putting it lightly. And I just want to make that known, that because even despite that, the character of James Bond is still intriguing, I think, in that film. I just want to make sure that that's known, that we're not going to be arguing for the films specifically themselves.
Yeah, because you can argue the same thing for Ethan Hunt, like Mission Impossible 2, a film that a lot of people don't like.
Yes.
But you can argue for the character in that movie still.
Yeah, and I think that's just worth mentioning. But anyway, onto the character of James Bond himself. I think part of the reason why I would argue for him is not just for his technical skills, but also more for his intellect. I think this guy is conniving. This guy is tricky. And I think the biggest thing, though, is that he can finish the job even when he's drunk. I think,
which is half the time.
But just imagine what he can do when he is sober. And just on that, and aside from that, the fact that he is so even conniving, even in his drunken state, like most of the time. I think the fact that this guy is such a successful womanizer just makes him any man's dream to be like. And I think he's for us men that are still like in our mid-20s and still single, he's like a perfect role model, if that even sounds remotely respectable. But at the same time, I think just judging from the character from like an artistic standpoint, this is the action hero that we're finally starting to understand the inner psychosis of. When you look at these Daniel Craig films, and you look at a film like Skyfall specifically, I feel like we actually are starting to sense vulnerability with this guy, and he feels human, which makes it, I think, that much more visceral when he accomplishes these tasks. And even when you look at the relationship that he had with M in a movie like Skyfall, I think he's the human spy that we learn to really care about. But because of that humanity, it adds that visceral sense to it that I think makes him the worthy hero. And I think if you put him against a fight with Ethan Hunt, I think it's going to be more. There's a more painful experience there, and I think his conniving sense of intellect, I think he could come out on top. But that's my argument.
Well, okay. Well, you make a good argument. I am going to come to the corner for Mr. Ethan Hunt, because I think what makes this character so fascinating is he is motivated by sheer willpower. He has more stamina, more skill than anyone else. I mean, he will freaking hang on the outside of an aircraft, something only the Hulk can do, but somehow Ethan Hunt can pull it off. He can also hang outside the tallest building in the world, and he is the best. And what we were saying about Rogue Nation is he has this pride about being the best. So when someone matches up to him, or someone is one step ahead of him, he is going to do whatever it takes to make sure that at the end he still is the winner. And I love that he's motivated like that. There's no one that can match that kind of willpower, and he needs to have it because he's doing the impossible. He is in the IMF. He is set out to do the most impossible task that no one else can do. And in this latest film, we see that he has to hold his breath for like 6-7 minutes long, and it was the only way to get the information that they needed, and not very many people on the planet can do that. So is he the smartest person on the planet? No, he's not the smartest person on the planet, but he is very creative, and he will go the distance, and I think that'll get you a long way in a fight against James Bond. So for me, it's Ethan Hunt.
That's a very good argument, sir. Very good argument. And I knew you were going to go that route because it's so freaking obvious that you just look at these set pieces in the Mission Impossible films, and the fact that Ethan Hunt, we're calling him, Tom Cruise doesn't exist. This is Ethan Hunt.
Ethan Hunt.
The fact that he really did this stuff is like, it really does add that sense of like not just motivation, but this guy is such a daredevil, and he's not afraid to take risks, so I can definitely see that. I will say, though, just to kind of give a slight rebuttal, that I do think Daniel Craig's James Bond, as we're saying, specifically Daniel Craig's in these most recent films, he did get faced with a pretty impossible task in Casino Royale that I kind of wonder how Ethan Hunt would actually be put up against it, and that's the interrogation scene with Lashif, where he is getting whacked in the freaking balls constantly, and he still won't budge. He still will not give the questioning answers that Lashif is asking for, which kind of makes me think, I wonder how Ethan Hunt can handle that kind of pain. I think he can handle pretty well.
He wouldn't get hit.
He wouldn't get hit.
He'd somehow jump out of the chair and whack the guy with it. Because
hey, but Ethan Hunt's been captured. He's been tied up. They could have easily just whacked at his junk. but the fact that James Bond had so much stamina during that scene, the fact that he could deal with that kind of pain and not budge to this guy's demands, I think Craig Bond, you the man.
And I will say, you're talking about James Bond being very smart, and I think Ethan Hunt has those moments as well. And we saw that in Rogue Nation. Yeah. We've seen that in some other films too, where he uses his surroundings, he uses the little gadgets. He may not have James Bond kind of gadgets, but the little that he does have, he uses to his advantage to outsmart his opponents too.
Absolutely, and I will agree with that. And obviously we're going to be a little bit respectful in this argument. I don't want to, and we'll make sure from both sides of it. But the fact that because you're absolutely right. I don't want to say that by saying James Bond is the more strategist and the smarter adversary doesn't mean Ethan Hunt isn't, because he absolutely is.
I agree.
However, I will say this, and also to support James Bond a bit more, is Ethan relies on that team dynamic. But that's the charm of the Mission Impossible films. That's what I love about those films. So that's not a knock on those films, but James Bond is able to work, I feel like, so much better on his own a lot. The only thing he really needs is a drink and to sleep with a girl, and then he's good. Obviously, he does get some help from Q, and he communicates with, the head and M, and he gets some camaraderie there. But he's more of a loner, and I think that makes him a bit of a tough adversary that way too. But but that's still the charm of the Mission Impossible films. The team element is why I love those films for what they are. Sure. I wonder how Ethan would really, I think he could stand pretty well just on his own in a situation against Bond, but I think he might be trying to Benji, open the door. It's like
sure. To be fair, and the last thing I'll say, and then we're going to get Michael into the mix here, is that Ethan Hunt, I don't think, has quite as many gadgets and technology as James Bond does.
Sure.
And that kind of works as James Bond's team, is all those little fancy stuff they has. And Ethan Hunt has his own, but not nearly as much. So, all right, that being said, Michael, let's get you into the mix. What do you think, Ethan Hunt or James Bond?
It's a hard call. I would have to go with Bond, though.
Oh, man.
Yeah!
Okay.
It just, as good as Hunt is, like you guys were saying earlier, he usually has 3 or 4 people behind him, making sure the door was open.
Sure.
Slipping a handcuff key to him.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Bond's been beat up pretty bad, and tooth and nail still kind of made his own way through the door.
Sure.
Even when he didn't have the gadgets. Heart will definitely get you across the finish line, and so that's kind of why I have to respect Hunt. But I'm a Bond. I got to go with Bond on this one.
Yay!
Damn.
Well, I'm happy to say that because you won the last battle round when we did Jurassic Park versus Terminator. But I walked into that one. Of course, Terminator is better than Jurassic Park. But I'm happy to say that I win on this one. But you know what? This was a good showdown. I think we actually had a really fair fight with these ones.
I think so too.
And you can easily I could easily argue for Hunt if I had to be forced to put in that position. And in many ways, I think there are even a lot of the Mission Impossible films themselves that I even like better than a lot of the Bond films too. I think just for what they are. But no, this was fun.
And I think if we're getting to just a one-on-one fight, which means that you may or may not have gadgets, I think Ethan Hunt just has the stamina to last longer.
I could agree with that. Okay, yeah.
And I think both of them would take a lot of hits. it would be a long fight. I think it would be a very back and forth kind of fight. But in the end, I think it would be Hunt's stamina and willpower that he shows to win. And James Bond would be able to go the distance in a lot of ways. I just think ultimately that would be the deciding factor.
I would agree. But yeah, I think it'd be a close one. It's a fight I want to see. It's a fight I want to see. It'd probably be more interesting than that Floyd Mayweather fight we had earlier this year, which is boring. But oh man, I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be like that Ronda Rousey fight that just happened this last weekend where she won in 34 seconds. It wouldn't be that either.
Don't get me started on that. Oh my god.
All right, well, let's get to any final thoughts. We'll start with you, Michael. Any final thoughts you have on this James Bond versus Ethan Hunt matchup?
Truthfully, I'm not a real big fan of the new James Bond. I think he's a good actor, but I'm just kind of still an old school Bond fan.
Sure.
And the new Bonds, it's hard to tell a lot of the spy movies apart anymore.
Sure, yeah.
Bond, Mission Impossible, they just kind of all blend and merge anymore. There's really nothing character-wise. They're all just super badasses that can take down a nation.
Yeah,
so I just gonna have a lot of trouble getting to them anymore.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good point. What about you, Brendan?
I could definitely see that point, and I know there are a lot of old school Bond fans that actually do have a lot of problems with the more recent Bond films. And while I see those points, I mean, I think internally I would support those films because I think there's actually, especially with the film Skyfall, there is a dramatic weight to that film that I thought was very surprising, and I hope that carries over in the Spectre. And I'm not an old school Bond fan. I'm only 25 years old. Yet saying that, and my favorite Bond film is actually On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I love that movie, but I do love the Craig films, except for Quantum of Solace. But I love those other two films exactly for what they are. I'm really looking forward to Spectre. But yeah, I could see that argument. But I think dramatically these films are. I would say if you want to compare them to the other spy films out there, you almost call each different one like a certain alcoholic beverage, whereas obviously the Bond films now are like a good martini, shaken not stirred. The Bourne films I think are like like a good like bourbon or like a good whiskey. The Mission Impossible films are like maybe a good craft beer or microbrewery, whereas the Fast and Furious movies are like the Bud Lights and the Coors Lights. but I think they all have a different weight to them. But I think the Bond films would definitely have a lot of dramatic weight that I think helps set them apart.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Brennan. And I like both of these franchises quite a bit, and I've liked the Daniel Craig movies quite a bit, and even Quantum of Solace, I didn't mind as much. I certainly didn't hate it like you did. And I think it was DJ Valentine that said this, and if it wasn't him, then I apologize, and I'll credit whoever really did say this, but I think it was him that would tell me that if you look at that movie as more of a continuation of Casino Royale, then it works a lot better if you look at it from that standpoint. And I think from that perspective, it does make a lot of sense. So I don't really mind it as much, but I really like Casino Royale. I loved Skyfall. I'm really looking forward to Spectre. And I like a lot of the old James Bond movies as well, as you guys were talking about. And we've talked a lot about Mission Impossible as well on this show, so I don't need to necessarily beat that dead horse as well. But I really, really have a lot of fun with those movies, despite whatever flaws they may have, and I hope that trend continues. I hope Spectre's great. I hope Mission Impossible 6, whenever we see that, is awesome. I cannot wait to see how they outdo each other outside of those practical stunts and whatnot. So
I'm really trying to hold back right now, because if that was DJ Valentine I'd say that was talking about Quantum of Solace being that continuation, that's what makes it more respectable. That's another argument for another time, because I think that makes the movie worse. Oh god, I hate that movie so much. I'm trying to hold back. Oh my god.
I certainly don't hate it like you do, but I do have the films that I do feel that way about. But anyway, I think both of these characters, Ethan Hunt and James Bond, are a ton of fun for a lot of different reasons. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this little argument and this InSession Film Showdown. So,
all right. Well, let us know if you agree or disagree with our takes on this showdown between Ethan Hunt versus James Bond. You can leave a comment on Facebook or Twitter, or you can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. But we'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this matter. Who would come out on top in this showdown?
And DJ, if I misquoted you and Brendan comes out to kill you, it's not my fault.
God.
So
I still love you, DJ, but if you're the one that said that, I gotta argue on that one. But anyway, that's for another time. That'd be a good nerding out session if that was you. But
it could be true. Yeah. All right. Well, before we get out of here, Mike, thanks so much for joining us this week, man.
Oh, thank you guys. This was really fun. So thank you.
Absolutely. Tell us once again about your blog and where can we find you on the internet and on social media?
You can find me at backseatviewerblogspot.com. Twitter, either MichaelCarr34 or Backseat Viewer. I do all sorts of movie reviews for all genres. Try to bring out new movie news, also indie films, stuff like that. So
Yeah, definitely go give Michael a follow. Really, really great stuff. And thanks again for all your support, Michael. It's definitely felt, and we really do appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And on that note, that should do it for this week's show. Again, just a reminder to like us on Facebook and Twitter, and also on YouTube and Google+. Just search InSession Film. You'll find us there. We do respond to every piece of email that we get, so you can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. We'll definitely get back to you as soon as we can. And sign up for our monthly newsletter. You can do that on Facebook by clicking the newsletter tab or on our site at InSessionFilm.com/newsletter.
And for more thoughts on the films that we watch, you can check us out on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. And you can also find us at LostAtHomePodcast.com. Our good friends there who have been featuring our shows and reviews there every week. We appreciate their support as well, but that's also another place that you can find us, and much appreciated for them as well. Also, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher. And while you are on iTunes, please leave us a review on what you on how you think of us. We'd appreciate some feedback there as well. Also, you can check out our Listen Now page, which is on our website at InSessionFilm.com/listen-now.
And the InSession Film Podcast is supported by our super awesome listeners like you. Once again, if you want to help us, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com, click on that bonus content tab in our main menu to hear that bonus content for just a small donation of 99 cents. You can check out the InSession Film store, get a fun t-shirt, or just go to InSessionFilm.com/donate, and you'll see a bunch of information there and how you can help us. One thing that I would highly recommend is checking out our mobile app, where you can hear everything we do under one roof for just a one-time fee of $1.99. You can find that app on the Amazon Market for Android devices, the Windows 8 phone store for Windows devices, and the Podcast Box app for iOS devices. And again, all those details are on the site at InSessionFilm.com/apps. As for the show next week, Brendan, what do we got?
Next week, we're going to be taking a look at the Fantastic Four, or actually it's called Fan-4-Stick when you look at the marketing of that.
Yes.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not really looking forward to this one, but I'm hoping for the best. I'm always going on optimistic because I didn't like those first two films, but that's another conversation for another time.
Sure.
But yes, we will be talking about Fantastic Four, the latest in this Marvel, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but another Marvel film, and now also directed by Scott Trank, who we've been hearing a lot of bad things about on the set and things like that. For our top three, we're going to be doing our top three favorite superpowers represented in film, which I think is going to be pretty interesting. I look forward to that as well. And on the note of how much I don't like those first two Fantastic Four films, I think you may be in the same boat. I think a lot of people may be on the same boat. I think it might be appropriate to revisit just rants and raves, and you know, even if we end up ranting about this film, I think it's going to make that third segment even more appropriate. And I think we've got a lot of good news and a lot of good updates that have been coming recently within the movie world that warrants a rants and raves. You haven't done one in a while, so that's what we'll be doing.
I'm actually looking forward to the movie a little bit more than you. I don't have necessarily this nostalgic tie to the franchise like a lot of people do, so the changes don't bother me. The cast looks awesome. I like Trank's first movie, and the trailers have actually kind of intrigued me. I don't think they look all that terrible, so it may not be the best thing we've ever seen, but it looks far from the worst. But my only big thing is next Friday is my birthday, so it better not screw up my birthday.
Oh, God. Now, please be good.
Yeah.
You do not want to exit your 20s with a bad movie if it is that bad.
Exactly. So, on that note, though, before we get out of here, Michael, any final thoughts on anything before we leave today?
Hoping the new Fantastic Four turns out to be a good one, actually. Other than that, no.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
Can I toot my own horn just a little bit?
Sure.
Because we were talking about James Bond a lot already, and I didn't get a chance to mention this, and I texted you about this. But one of my favorite things about the Bond films, and everyone likes this, is who is going to sing the theme song.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of rumors going around about who it's going to be, mostly around Ellie Goulding and Sam Smith and even Lana Del Rey. And I have been saying from the very beginning who I want to see do a James Bond theme song. And only a couple days ago, this betting company in England, who is this? This is the same company that was placing betting odds on who's going to take over Bond after Daniel Craig. Remember, they had like Damian Lewis and Idris Elba with all that. But they've started doing the same thing for the Bond theme song. Who's going to sing it? And they recently closed the betting pool because someone put a 15,000 pound bet, which equates to almost like $23,000 on Radiohead singing the theme song. And I've been saying from the beginning, I want to see Radiohead do a Bond theme, and it looks like they are now the rumored front runner. So toot toot. It's not official. I can't really officially toot my own horn yet until it's officially announced, but
it's close.
It would make a lot of sense because the band Radiohead has been so quiet these past couple months. They were supposed to be recording a new album, then all of a sudden they stopped the recording process. I don't even know what they've been doing these past couple months. So maybe they were securing a deal to do this. I don't know. But I'm excited. I love Radiohead. I love Radiohead.
Very cool stuff. For my final thoughts, real fast, I am turning 30 next Friday, so that's scary. Very excited, I guess, to move on to the next stage of my life, but I can't believe I'm not going to be in my 20s anymore. That's going to be kind of weird. But
You're a kid until you're 33, is the way I see it.
That's the way you see it. I will say, I just want to reiterate a couple things from up front, though. One, I'm very excited for this Best Movies of the Decade so far thing. I've probably watched, over the course of the last 2 weeks, no joke, probably 10, 15 movies as far as catching up from 2010 and 2011, especially. So I've caught up with a lot of stuff. I'm very excited for that show. So this has been a really fun project, and I look forward to getting into that in September.
Me too. And you're making me look bad. I still got a lot to catch up on with, too.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
man.
It's been fun. It's been good. So, and then again, just a huge thanks to everybody for last month and for listening. It just really, really made our week to see those stats and see everyone's support. It's really amazing. So on that note, thanks, Michael, for joining us once again, man. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you guys next time on the InSession Film Podcast. For the entire version of our podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Stitcher, or check us out online at InSessionFilm.com.